David tightened the strap of his camera on his shoulder, taking a deep breath, letting the fresh air of the forest fill his lungs. The early morning sunlight filtered through the dense canopy, casting shimmering rays on the forest floor covered in decaying leaves. The songs of birds, the rustling of the wind through the old pine branches, all of it made him feel as if he had stepped into another world, separate from the noise and chaos of modern life. As a wildlife photographer, David had dedicated his life to capturing nature's most precious moments. Today, his goal was to track and photograph a rare pack of gray wolves, mysterious predators that had disappeared from human sight for years. According to local hunters, a wolf pack had recently reappeared in this forest, a sign that nature was slowly reviving. But more than just a photograph, David hoped to truly experience their world. He believed that every picture should be more than just a beautiful frame, it had to tell a story of survival, connection, and the mysteries of nature that humanity had yet to fully understand. As he walked along the shadowed trail, a set of animal tracks embedded in the damp soil caught his attention. Wolf tracks. His heartbeat quickened. He crouched down, tracing the crisp outline of the prints with his fingertips. They showed no signs of erosion, they were fresh. Lifting his camera, David began capturing every detail of the forest. He knew he was on the verge of something special. But what he didn't know was that fate had already set this journey to become something far greater than just a photography expedition. David continued stepping carefully over the dry leaves, following the wolf tracks with measured precision. The sun had risen higher, its golden light filtering through the trees, casting a warm glow over the forest. A mix of excitement and anticipation welled up inside him. He knew he was getting closer to what he had been searching for. Then, he heard it. A faint whimper, weak and fleeting, carried by the wind through the stillness of the forest. He froze, his ears sharpening their focus. Once more, the sound came, clearer this time. It wasn't the call of a bird, nor the cry of a predator. It was the sound of pain. David tightened his grip on his camera, scanning his surroundings. The noise came from a gentle slope ahead, where thick undergrowth concealed the view. He moved cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest with every step. As he pushed through the dense foliage, the sight before him made him stop in his tracks. A gray wolf lay on the damp forest floor, its breath ragged. Its thick fur was matted with dirt and dried mud, and one of its front legs was caught in a rusted steel trap, a cruel device used by poachers. Despite its injury, the wolf's eyes were sharp, wary. It let out a weak whimper, but when it spotted David, it let out a low, trembling growl, a mixture of fear and pain seeping through its gaze. Anger flared in David's chest. Traps. These merciless devices still existed, despite long-standing bans. Someone had set this one, indifferent to the suffering it caused the wildlife. Slowly, he knelt, placing his camera aside and raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice as soft as a lullaby. The wolf flinched, its gaze locked onto him, but the growl faded. David knew that an injured wolf could still be dangerous, even in its weakened state. But he also knew that if he did nothing, it wouldn't survive. Carefully, he reached into his pack, pulling out a small knife. He studied the trap, a primitive yet effective contraption, its iron jaws tightly gripping the wolf's leg. Blood had already seeped into the moist earth beneath it. Taking a deep breath, David steadied himself, then placed his hands on the trap. "Just a little more, all right," he whispered, as if reassuring the wolf. The wolf trembled but did not resist. David pressed down with all his strength, forcing the metal jaws apart. The aged steel resisted, biting into his palms, but he persisted. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his muscles straining. Then, with a sharp snap, the trap released. The wolf let out a pained yelp, jerking its leg free and stumbling backward, its body trembling from the ordeal. It didn't flee, only stood there, staring at David with its wild, untamed eyes, as if assessing the man who had just set it free. David didn't move hastily. He took a slow step back, giving the wolf space, then crouched down, making himself as non-threatening as possible. He knew he couldn't force it to stay, but he also couldn't leave while it was still bleeding. The wolf licked its wounded leg, its gaze never straying from him. David remained silent, allowing it to decide whether he was a threat or not. Then, after what felt like an eternity, something extraordinary happened. The wolf did not run. Instead of vanishing into the depths of the forest, it took an unsteady step toward him, its injured leg trembling under its weight. It lowered its head slightly, sniffing at his boot, a hesitant but deliberate gesture, not unlike a dog assessing a stranger's trustworthiness. David held his breath. A fragile connection had just been formed between man and nature. But he had no idea that this wolf would not only be a creature he had saved, but also his protector in the days to come. David remained still, his heart still racing from the adrenaline, but he felt no fear. The moment the wolf stepped closer, sniffing lightly at his boot, he realized something: it had accepted his presence. Not wanting to startle it, David quietly reached into his backpack and pulled out a clean cloth and a bottle of water. He slowly unscrewed the cap, poured a small amount onto the cloth, and gently placed it on the ground a few feet away from the wolf. "It's just water, nothing else," he murmured, as if speaking to an old friend. The wolf looked at him, then at the cloth. It hesitated for a moment before lowering its head to sniff. Realizing it was harmless, it licked at the damp fabric, savoring the cool moisture to ease its thirst and pain. David remained patient. He knew that trust, especially with a wild animal, could not be rushed. But then, a distant sound shattered the silence, a long, haunting howl echoing through the forest. David tensed, turning his head to listen. It was not a lone howl. It was a call. A signal. He glanced back at the injured wolf. Its ears had perked up, its gaze sharpening. It lifted its head, letting out a soft whimper before locking eyes with David. It was being called home. David's mind raced. Could this wolf not be a lone wanderer but part of a pack? If so, did they know it had been trapped? Were they coming for it? The howl came again, closer this time. David's heartbeat quickened. He wasn't sure if he was about to witness a reunion or if he had just walked into danger. Then, he saw them. Large shadows emerged between the trees, golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. 3 other wolves, larger and more imposing than the injured one, stepped cautiously into view. David swallowed hard. He knew running was out of the question, it would mark him as prey. Fighting? Impossible, this was their domain, not his. The injured wolf let out a soft whimper and took a few shaky steps backward before lifting its head. One of the wolves, the largest of the 3, with dark gray fur and an intense, commanding gaze, stepped forward. An alpha. David could feel the pressure in the air shift. He forced himself to stay calm, making sure no sudden movement would provoke the pack. Then, something unexpected happened. The injured wolf approached the alpha, lowering its head and nudging its snout into the thick fur of its leader, a sign of submission and respect. The alpha remained motionless for a moment before suddenly licking the injured wolf's head, a gesture of acceptance. David held his breath. It had returned to its pack. But that was not the most surprising thing. After the brief reunion, the injured wolf turned back toward David and let out a soft whine. Not a growl, not a warning. A thank you. The alpha studied David, its intelligent eyes assessing the strange human before it. There was no hostility, but neither was there trust. After a few tense moments, the alpha gave a subtle nod, so slight it could have been missed. But David understood. It was an acknowledgement. And just like that, the pack turned and disappeared into the night, vanishing as silently as they had come. David exhaled, realizing he had just experienced one of the most profound moments of his life. He hadn't just saved a wolf. He had earned the recognition of an entire pack. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. His connection with these wolves was far from over. Though the wolf pack had vanished into the night, their presence lingered in David's mind. He hadn't just witnessed a wild reunion, he had felt something deeper. A connection. Yet that night, back at his campsite, sleep evaded him. He lay awake, listening to the whispers of the wind through the trees, the rustling of dry leaves as small creatures wandered the forest floor. But beyond the familiar symphony of nature, there was something else. He felt watched. David wasn't sure what it was. This sensation wasn't terrifying, but it wasn't comforting either. It was as if someone, or something, was observing him from the shadows. He sat up slowly, reaching for the flashlight beside him. With a steady hand, he swept its beam across the camp. Nothing. Just darkness, silent trees, and the moonlight casting pale streaks across the leaf-covered ground. David shook his head, convincing himself it was just exhaustion playing tricks on him. But as he turned back toward his tent, he froze. Beside the long-dead campfire, something was there that shouldn't have been. Footprints. Clear wolf tracks imprinted in the damp earth, right in front of his tent. David's breath caught in his throat. The wolves had returned. They had been here. While he slept. He crouched down, examining the prints. They bore no signs of aggression, no claw marks, no disturbances in the dirt. No signs of destruction or attack. They had simply come, stood there, and then left. He lifted his gaze toward the tree-line, where the dense night concealed the secrets of the wild. Why? Why had they come back? And more importantly, why hadn't they disappeared forever, like any other wolf pack would have? A strange unease settled over him. David wasn't one to believe in superstitions, but this pack wasn't behaving like ordinary wolves. The next day, David resolved to continue his work. After all, he was here to capture the raw beauty of nature, and what he had witnessed might be one of the most remarkable moments of his career. He slung his backpack over his shoulder, checked his camera, and set off into the forest, choosing a new path he had yet to explore. But soon, he noticed something strange. The forest was unnaturally silent. No birdsong. No rustling leaves. No sign of any wildlife. David frowned. This kind of silence wasn't normal. He pressed forward, camera at the ready, but a creeping sense of unease grew within him. Then, suddenly, a howl. Not distant, but close. David spun around, and froze in place. Standing between the towering trees behind him was the alpha wolf. It had returned. And it wasn't alone. Two other wolves flanked it, their golden eyes gleaming in the faint light that filtered through the canopy. David's heartbeat pounded in his chest. But then, he realized, his fear didn't come from their presence. It came from what they were trying to tell him. The alpha didn't growl. It didn't advance. It showed no signs of aggression. Instead, it simply stood there, staring at him, before turning its head, looking deliberately in another direction. As if pointing the way. David swallowed hard. This couldn't be a coincidence. Something inside him urged him to follow. And as if sensing his thoughts, the alpha turned and began walking, its movements slow and deliberate, leading deeper into the forest. It wanted him to come. David hesitated for only a moment, then he stepped forward. He had no idea where they were taking him. But he knew one thing for certain, the wolves were trying to show him something important. And he couldn't ignore it. David followed the wolves, each step filled with both apprehension and intrigue. He no longer doubted it, this pack was not just a group of wild animals. They were leading him. The forest grew denser, wilder, as towering trees blocked out the sun, casting eerie shadows across the undergrowth. The deeper they went, the more the air thickened with an ancient, almost sacred energy. But David did not hesitate. Something inside him urged him to keep going. After nearly 15 minutes, the alpha wolf came to a halt. It stood atop a rocky ledge, overlooking a clearing hidden deep within the forest. David cautiously stepped forward, following the wolf's gaze. And then, he froze. Below the ledge, nestled in a secluded valley, was an abandoned campsite. Tattered tents lay in disarray, some collapsed, others barely standing. Long-dead fire pits were surrounded by scattered belongings, signs of life abandoned in a hurry. But what unsettled David the most wasn't the emptiness. It was the evidence of a struggle. Broken branches. Disturbed earth. And blood. Not much, but enough to tell David that something had happened here. His pulse quickened. Who had been here? And why had they left so suddenly? He scanned the area, his photographer's eye catching something partially buried beneath a thick layer of dry leaves and damp soil. A shape. An object. David carefully descended from the rocky ledge, stepping toward the unknown. The wolves remained still, watching him in silence. Kneeling down, he brushed away the leaves. And then, he froze. A symbol. A strange emblem carved into a wooden plank, lying amidst the remnants of the camp. It was an image of a wolf, etched deeply with a blade. But beside it, unmistakably, was the outline of a human figure. A chill ran down David's spine. This was no ordinary campsite. Whoever had been here, had a connection to the wolves. David pulled out his camera and captured images of the strange symbol. But just as he was about to investigate further, the wolves suddenly grew tense. The alpha lifted its head, ears pricked, eyes sharp with vigilance. The others began to emit low growls. Something was coming. David held his breath, his heart pounding as he quickly retreated behind a thick tree trunk, seeking cover. Footsteps. Not the quiet rustling of animals. Human footsteps. Then, from the depths of the forest, 3 figures emerged. They wore camouflage clothing and carried hunting rifles. David's breath hitched. These weren't casual campers. One of them knelt down, flipping over the wooden slab with the wolf emblem, cursing under his breath. They've been here. They? David frowned, straining to listen. Another man spoke, his voice low and urgent. We need to find them before it's too late. If those wolves really have anything to do with what's happening, they need to be eliminated. David's mind raced. What was happening? He glanced at the wolf pack. They weren't afraid, they were waiting. As if they had faced these men before. A chill ran down David's spine. There was something much bigger at play here. And there was no doubt about it now. He had just stumbled into a mystery far beyond anything he had anticipated. David remained perfectly still, his heart pounding as he listened to the conversation unfolding before him. These wolves can't keep lingering around here, a bearded man grumbled. We wiped out the rest of them, but this pack keeps showing up. It's like they're protecting something. Or someone, the second man said, his voice low and cryptic. David frowned. Protecting someone? Who were the rest of them? And what exactly was the pack guarding? Just then, one of the wolves let out a howl, not an ordinary call, but a signal. The 3 men stiffened, gripping their weapons tightly. Damn it! They've raised the alarm. And then, the forest moved. David felt it before he saw it, the shift in the air, the flicker of motion between the trees. Shadows. Wolves. They weren't running. They weren't hiding. They were surrounding the hunters. They were fighting back. The air was thick with tension. The 3 men stood back to back, eyes darting through the darkness, their breathing shallow. "We should leave," the youngest muttered, his voice unsteady. "If we don't." He never finished his sentence. A deep growl echoed from the right, and a wolf emerged from the shadows. It didn't lunge, it moved swiftly past them, like a ghost, a warning. The men immediately raised their guns. Bang! A gunshot shattered the silence. David held his breath, eyes darting to the wolves. No one was hit. But the shot had sealed their fate. The forest exploded with motion. Shadows leaped forward. The men shouted, spinning to aim, but the wolves were faster. David watched in stunned disbelief. This wasn't a wild, frenzied attack, this was a battle with intent, with coordination. The pack moved in perfect unison, driving the intruders toward a single direction, the edge of the forest. A massive black wolf lunged from the side, knocking one of the men off balance. His rifle flew from his grip, landing uselessly on the forest floor. Then, silence. The three men stood, panting, their backs now to the abyss of the wilderness. The alpha wolf stepped forward. It did not kill them. It didn't need to. It simply stared, its glowing eyes piercing through the dark, sending an unmistakable message. "This is not your place." The men hesitated, exchanged quick glances, then turned and ran. David remained still, barely daring to breathe. He had just witnessed a battle unlike anything he had ever seen. And the wolves had won. David stood frozen, his mind racing. This was no ordinary wolf pack. They understood. They had strategy. And most importantly, they were protecting something. His gaze dropped to the symbol carved into the wooden plank, then back to the alpha wolf. "Who are you protecting?" he whispered. The alpha held his stare for a long moment. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked away. One by one, the other wolves followed, melting into the shadows as if they had never been there. But David knew, this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. David remained motionless in the darkened woods, his mind spinning with endless questions. Who were those men? Why did the wolves fight like warriors defending their land? And most importantly, what were they protecting? His eyes drifted back to the worn wooden plank he had uncovered earlier. The symbols carved into it weren't random, they resembled an ancient script, something not belonging to any modern civilization. He needed answers. Without hesitation, David made his decision. He would venture deeper into the forest. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the dense canopy, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the forest. David moved cautiously, his footsteps blending into the narrow trail left behind by the wolves. And then, he saw it. A small village, hidden deep within the forest. Wooden houses, their walls draped in emerald moss, stood in quiet harmony with nature. A dirt path led into the settlement, its surface undisturbed by recent human activity. But what caught David's attention most were the symbols etched onto the walls, identical to the markings he had seen on the wooden plank. His breath caught. Stepping forward cautiously, he wasn't sure what to expect. Then, a voice broke the silence. An elderly man, his silver hair gleaming in the morning light, stood before him. Despite his age, his posture was strong, his presence commanding. "We knew you would come," the man said, his voice deep and unwavering. David stiffened. "Who are you?" he asked. The man smiled, not with warmth, but with a quiet knowing. His eyes, however, held a profound seriousness. "We are the guardians of this forest. And now, whether you realize it or not, you are part of it too." David had no words. But deep in his heart, he knew, he had found something far greater than any photograph he had ever taken. The old man led David deeper into the village. It didn't take long for him to realize, this place was unlike any he had ever seen. It didn't fight against the forest. It existed within it, seamlessly woven into nature without destruction or separation. Many years ago, our ancestors made a pact with the wolves, the old man explained as they passed through a small clearing in the village. Humans and wolves were once enemies. But over time, we learned to live alongside them. And in return, they became our guardians. David listened, his heart pounding. The men I saw in the forest, who are they? The old man exhaled, his expression darkening. They are poachers. They take what does not belong to them. They kill animals, destroy the land, and defile what is sacred here. But the wolves will not allow it. A chill ran down David's spine. These wolves weren't just wild animals. They were warriors. And me? He asked. Why am I here? The old man studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. Because you have proven that humanity still has compassion. David spent the entire day in the village, learning about the centuries-old bond between the wolves and the people who had lived in harmony with them. He realized now, this forest wasn't just a place of natural beauty to be captured in photographs. It was a living story. A part of history. And now, a part of him. But the time had come for a decision. Will you leave? The old man asked. David remained silent, his mind racing. He thought of everything he had experienced, the moment he freed the wounded wolf, the battle in the forest, the secrets he had uncovered. He could return to his old life, continuing his journey as a wildlife photographer. Or he could stay. Become a part of something greater than himself. The next morning, David left the village, but not to say goodbye forever. He retraced his steps to the place where he had first encountered the wolves, standing silently amidst the towering trees. A gentle breeze drifted through the forest, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. And then, he heard it. A howl, rising through the air. David turned, and saw them. The pack stood there, watching him. The alpha met his gaze, its golden eyes gleaming in the soft morning light. There was no growl, no warning. Only recognition. A welcome. David smiled. He had found the story of his life. And this time, he was no longer just an observer. The story of David and the wolves is more than just a tale of survival, it is a reflection of the profound, often unseen, connections between humans and nature. In modern life, people frequently see the wilderness as something separate, something to be conquered or feared. Yet, David's encounter with the wolves reveals a deeper truth: nature does not merely exist around us, it communicates, protects, and remembers. This story teaches us an invaluable lesson about respect and coexistence. The wolves were not just mindless creatures, they had purpose, understanding, and a reason for their actions. Likewise, in life, we often judge too quickly without seeking to understand the deeper meaning behind people's behaviors or situations. Whether it is in relationships, workplaces, or society, true wisdom comes not from dominance but from observation, patience, and empathy. Furthermore, the mysterious symbol David found suggests that history and nature are intertwined, and many secrets of the past are still hidden in the world around us. It is a reminder that in our fast-paced, technology-driven society, we should not lose sight of the wisdom of the past and the value of the natural world. Only by respecting both can we move forward in harmony rather than conflict.